Absolutely. Here's an expanded version of Scene 1, fully immersive in around 1,000 words. Dash dash dash. The streets were quiet but not peaceful, the kind of silence that carries the smell of decay and urgency all at once. Puddles of water collected in cracked sidewalks, reflecting the dull gray of the overcast sky. In one of the narrow alleys, a small figure crouched against a brick wall, her bare feet resting on cold, uneven stones. She pulled her thin shawl closer around her shoulders, but it offered little protection from the biting wind that snuck through the gaps in the buildings. Her hair, tangled and dull, hung over her face, partly obscuring her eyes, which darted nervously at every passing shadow. Hunger gnawed at her stomach with a fierce insistence, twisting her insides until each breath felt heavier than the last. The girl, no older than 10, held a small piece of bread in her hand. It was hard and dry, salvaged from a dumpster behind a bakery. She had been rationing it carefully, knowing that it might be the only thing she could call a meal for the entire day. She had learned long ago that trust was dangerous. Adults, if they even noticed her, often looked through her as if she were invisible, or worse, saw her as a nuisance. But there was something instinctual inside her that warned her when danger approached. She tightened her grip on the bread, her knuckles whitening, and her small body tensed as she sensed movement down the alley. The sound of tires on wet pavement grew louder, smooth and deliberate, the unmistakable hum of a luxury car cutting through the usual city noise. Her eyes flicked up, and she saw it, a sleek black limousine gliding along the street like a shadow with sharp edges. It stopped precisely at the curb, the engine quieting to a near whisper. She recognized the type of car. Not everyone could afford such a machine, and though she didn't know the man who would step out, she had seen enough of the world to know wealth when she smelled it, saw it, felt it in the air around someone. The door opened, and out stepped Victor Harlow, his presence immediately impossible to ignore. He moved with the assurance of a man used to being obeyed without question, his tailored suit perfectly creased, his polished shoes gleaming against the wet asphalt. His face was calm, almost detached, but there was a glint in his eyes that suggested a hunger for observation rather than nourishment. Victor was a billionaire whose reputation preceded him, known not only for his immense wealth but also for his curiosity about human behavior, his experiments with people in positions of power and helplessness alike. He looked around briefly before his gaze landed on her. The girl froze. Something in her chest tightened, a mix of fear and awareness. She had survived on these streets long enough to know the difference between a man who simply passed by and a man who carried influence, someone whose every move could shift outcomes in ways she couldn't imagine. Victor's eyes held her for a moment, and in that gaze, she recognized both danger and fascination. Victor crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level, and smiled, a controlled smile that revealed just enough charm to be disarming but not enough to be wholly reassuring. "Well, well," he said softly, his voice carrying over the distance between them. "What do we have here? A little snack for the morning." He gestured toward the bread in her hands. The girl's eyes widened, and she clutched the bread even tighter, holding it close to her chest. She shook her head vehemently. "Don't eat that," she said, her voice trembling, yet sharp with a seriousness that seemed beyond her years. It's poisoned." Victor chuckled lightly, a sound that echoed oddly in the narrow alley, making her flinch. "Poisoned, my dear child, who would poison a piece of bread on these streets? Are you sure your imagination isn't running wild?" His tone was playful but contained an undercurrent of challenge, as if he were testing her. "I'm not imagining," she insisted, shaking her head vigorously. I saw it. If you eat it, you'll see. You can't just." Her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard, afraid that her fear would not be enough to convince him. Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice slightly, a smile still tugging at the corner of his mouth. "And why would I listen to a girl like you?" he asked, though there was a faint curiosity in his tone now. "You are small, hungry, living in shadows. Why would I believe you over my own senses?" The girl's lips trembled. She thought of the nights she had spent scrounging for food, of the sharp edge of knives and the sudden appearances of hands that wanted more than she could give. Survival had taught her to see things that others missed, to notice danger before it reached her. And now, as she looked at this man, she knew, something about him made the warning inside her scream louder. "Because I can see it," she cried, almost pleading. "Please, don't eat it. Please, you have to trust me." Victor paused, an almost imperceptible shift in his expression crossing his face. He had seen fear many times, had manipulated it, dismissed it, ignored it. But there was something raw and urgent in the girl's stance, in the desperation and clarity of her warning, that tugged at an unfamiliar chord inside him. He noticed the metallic tang in the air, faint but present, like a whisper of something corrosive. His hand hovered near the bread, and for a fraction of a second, his playful amusement faltered. The girl's small hands shook violently now, but she did not release the bread. Her eyes were fixed on him, a mixture of terror and determination. "I'm telling you, you don't understand, but you can't eat it," she repeated, her voice rising. "If you do, it'll be too late." Victor straightened slightly, studying her face, the way her body was coiled like a spring ready to flee or strike. He realized something extraordinary. This child, this frail figure in tattered clothing, had the instinct to sense danger in a way he, with all his money and power, might never have learned. She had lived a life he couldn't imagine, and yet her warning, even without full explanation, carried a weight of truth he could feel in his gut. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind rattled the nearby shutters, the puddles reflected the gray light of the morning, and the city moved around them, oblivious. Victor looked at the bread again, his trained eyes catching the faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of a contaminant on its surface, the chemical tang of danger that matched the girl's fearful insistence. Then he finally spoke, quietly, almost to himself, "You might just be right." The girl's eyes widened, and her hands began to tremble less, though she still gripped the bread tightly. She had never seen anyone in his world, someone with all the power and money she could ever imagine, hesitate because of her warning. And yet, in that hesitation, she saw a small thread of understanding, a recognition that even the wealthy and powerful could be vulnerable if they failed to notice the truth. Victor crouched down slightly, his gaze never leaving her face. "Tell me," he said softly, "how did you know?" The girl swallowed hard, looking down at the bread, then back at him. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of experience and survival. "Because, I have to," she said simply. "If I don't, no one else will." Victor's smile returned, slower this time, more thoughtful than playful. For the first time, that morning, he felt a sense of respect for someone he would have otherwise dismissed in an instant. The alley seemed to hold its breath around them, the city's noise fading into a distant murmur. In that frozen moment, two very different worlds collided, the cold, polished life of the billionaire and the raw, unrefined struggle of the street child. And in that collision, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of truth, courage, and survival that transcended money, power, and fear. If you want, I can also expand scene 2 to 1,000 words with the same cinematic tension and emotional depth so the story becomes a full, immersive short story. Do you want me to do that next? Absolutely. Here's an expanded version of scene 2, around 1,000 words, continuing the story in an immersive, cinematic style. Victor's hand hovered over the bread for a moment longer than necessary, his mind racing through every possibility. The metallic tang in the air, faint yet unmistakable, sharpened his senses in a way that no luxury, no wealth, no experience in boardrooms could replicate. Years of travel, of dining with chemists and toxicologists, of negotiating with people who would lie to save their own lives, it all came together in a flash. Something was wrong, and for once, he realized that the danger was not in a contract, a deal, or a hostile competitor, it was right here, in the simplest, most unassuming object, a small, stale piece of bread. The girl watched him intently, her hands still trembling from fear and the adrenaline of having her warning taken seriously. She had lived through enough moments of disbelief, rejection, and indifference to know that most people, especially the rich and powerful, would have scoffed at her words, brushed them aside, and eaten the bread without a second thought. And yet, here he was, hesitating, listening, sensing. Her eyes flicked nervously from the bread to his face, searching for any sign of doubt, any sign that he might not understand. Victor placed the bread down carefully on the curb, stepping back slightly, his eyes never leaving the girl. The shift in his posture was subtle but profound. The man who had controlled boardrooms, commanded armies of employees, and bent the world to his will had just been stopped by a street child. For the first time in years, he felt a rare, humbling uncertainty. "You saved me," he said quietly, almost to himself. His voice was lower than before, stripped of the playful amusement that had characterized him moments ago. He looked at the girl, really looked, and saw the intensity in her eyes, the mix of fear, courage, and survival instinct that had forced him to pause. It was the kind of look that could not be faked, the kind that came from living life on the edge, knowing every day could be the last, and choosing to act anyway. The girl's chest heaved with relief, but she didn't relax completely. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, she whispered, her voice shaky but earnest. She took a cautious step closer, as if bridging the gap between their worlds required careful negotiation. I've seen people get hurt over things they didn't understand. I didn't want that to happen to you. Victor studied her, his mind piecing together fragments of instinct and reality. He could feel the presence of danger around him, invisible yet palpable, a threat masked in the ordinary. He realized that her survival, her intuition, and her courage were not mere accidents, they were honed skills, shaped by necessity, by hunger, and by a lifetime of avoiding harm. And in that realization, a deep respect began to grow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook he carried for moments like this. He scribbled a few notes quickly, more for himself than for her, documenting the incident with meticulous care. Noticing her curiosity, he folded the notebook back and looked at her again. You have eyes, he said slowly, that see more than most people twice your age. Most adults, myself included, would have walked right past, never noticed the danger. And yet, he trailed off, letting the weight of his words hang between them. The girl looked down at her feet, then back at him. I don't have a choice, she admitted quietly. I have to notice, I have to act, or else there's no one. Her gaze shifted toward the street behind them, where the city continued in oblivious motion, people rushing, cars honking, the world moving without care for the small and vulnerable. I've learned to see what others can't. To survive, you have to notice everything. Victor nodded slowly, a thoughtful smile appearing on his lips. It was a rare expression for him, one reserved for moments when observation and respect intersected. And yet, here you are, standing in the open, warning someone who could have easily ignored you, even harmed you. That's courage, he said. Or recklessness, perhaps both. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, a faint blush of pride coloring her cheeks. Maybe, she said softly, but someone had to do it. Victor crouched down once more, keeping his voice low and steady. I want to understand, he said. How did you know? How did you sense it? She hesitated, glancing again at the bread. Then she spoke, her voice firmer now, filled with the certainty that comes from experience. Because I pay attention, I notice the smell, the color, the way things feel. People like me, we don't have the luxury of ignoring details. We survive because we see what others miss. You can't just trust the world. You have to watch it, feel it, live it. Victor listened intently, absorbing her words. There was a raw wisdom in them, shaped by necessity rather than education or privilege. He realized that in all his years, in all the opulent palaces and boardrooms he had inhabited, he had never truly understood survival the way she did. Money could buy safety, power could enforce rules, but it could not teach instinct. It could not teach the intuition that came from watching, waiting, fearing, and acting. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the city around them fading into background noise. Victor felt a shift inside himself, a recalibration of what he thought he knew about the world. He had encountered danger many times before, but this was different. It was subtle, invisible, yet potent. And it had been revealed to him not by his security team, not by scientists, not by his own instincts, but by a 10-year-old girl with nothing but a piece of bread and a will to survive. Finally, he reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a small stack of bills, crisp and new. He held them out to her. Take this, he said. It's not charity. Consider it a recognition of what you did. The girl's hands shook as she accepted the money, staring at the crisp bills as if they were pieces of another world entirely. She had never seen this much money in her life. Yet she did not smile, did not laugh. Instead, she looked up at Victor, her gaze steady. Promise me something, she said quietly. Promise me you'll be careful. Not everything is what it seems. Some people, they lie, they hide danger where you'd never expect it. You can't always trust what you see. Victor's smile softened, thoughtful and almost wistful. I think, I just learned something I didn't know, he admitted. Thank you, for showing me that. She nodded, a faint smile brushing her lips, a mixture of relief and pride. Just, be careful, she repeated. And remember, sometimes the smallest voices see the loudest dangers. Victor stood, adjusting his suit and straightening his posture. The limousine waited, sleek and indifferent to the lesson just learned in a narrow alley. But as he walked toward it, he felt a shift inside him, a subtle change in the way he perceived the world. Money, power, and influence could move mountains, but courage, instinct, and observation, qualities often overlooked, could save lives, even those of the most powerful. He paused at the car door, looking back once more at the girl. She had already turned, preparing to melt back into the shadows of the streets she called home. But he would remember her, and her words, and the way she had stopped him from making a fatal mistake. In a world that often ignored the powerless, this girl had reminded him that vigilance, humility, and respect for life were virtues that no amount of wealth could buy. And in that quiet, fleeting connection between the billionaire and the street child, the impossible had happened. Two worlds collided, one shaped by opulence and power, the other by hunger and survival, and both were forever changed. If you want, I can now combine both expanded scenes into a polished, 2,000-word short story with natural flow and dialogue tweaks for maximum emotional impact. It would read like a cinematic short story ready for publishing or adaptation. Do you want me to do that?